afternoon, Awesemo race fans. Good to be back here with you. Second Saturday in a row that you get me instead of our pal Jason Floyd. He's out on the road today. But lucky enough, I left all my Yankee stuff in the other room this week. And lucky enough, I'm here with Phil, the expert, the man who's going to take us through all of this stuff. Give us all the great picks for NASCAR DFS for the weekend. We're going to go through all of your top drivers. We're going to review the entire slate like you normally get from us on a Saturday afternoon. But first, I just want to mention that we are brought to you by Prize Picks. We'll talk to you a little bit more about them. And we also have to mention we've got a bunch of podcasts up. All of our different shows go up as podcasts, but we've got a specific one that we want you guys to know about. It's called Betting You. And it's a sports betting podcast. It's with Ben Rasa and Matt Kajeski. It goes up every single Wednesday, and they cover everything about college football betting. Take you through every conference, all the best bets on the board. It is a really good show. It gives you tons and tons of insight into which bets you should be looking at for the weekend for college football. You pair that with Odd Shopper, and we are about to launch some cool new stuff for Odd Shopper. You put those two things together, and you better be printing money for college football betting, guys. So check that out, Betting You, everywhere you can find your usual podcasts. Moving on, make sure you hit the like, the subscribe. We'll get to that one real quick now. But Phil, how's your weekend going, buddy? It's good to be back here with you.
Awesome. For the people that were watching, we just had a really interesting trucks slate. I mean, it basically broke down the way that we would expect a typical Talladega race to go. And we're going to get into the whole stack the back, roster construction, game theory, and all of that. But I mean, it was basically, if you applied that kind of game theory to the Talladega race and you didn't go crazy with your ownership, like you didn't just see Parker Kligerman starting 37th and just slam him in, then you probably had a pretty good slate. So the Xfinity race is going on now. We'll see how that one evolves, but the big one that we're all looking forward to is the Cup race tomorrow.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The big YellaWood. And that's the first thing I wanted to mention is, we were laughing behind the scenes here. It's just funny that it's this sponsor, because I was just talking yesterday about needing some artificial flooring for my bedroom that's getting repaired behind me there. So maybe it's a little fortuitous that they're sponsoring it. I'm going to try and not pronounce it YellaWood throughout the show. We'll do our best here. But Phil, you mentioned a couple things. One was on game theory and strategy for these kind of events. And we saw that kind of come to fruition last weekend with Denny Hamlin winning the race and our heavy favorite and the chalk of the day, Kyle Larson, not really coming through. And it sounded like, I read your article earlier, and it sounded like it was entirely due to some happenstance around a bad pit. So talk to us a little bit about like the impact that had last week. And then does anything off the top of the board, just as like a teaser, stand out to you as maybe something that could be a similar type of concern where maybe the chalk goes bust or something unexpected happens with this week, just to get us started?
Right. If people weren't watching the race at Las Vegas last weekend because you were watching Sunday night football or what have you, basically Larson was doing exactly what we expected him to do, what the books expected him to do. He was leading the most laps. It was the second stage, and then we had a horrific wreck, and it paralyzed the guys up front, namely the Hendrick drivers. Everybody else decided, we're going to come down pit road. We're going to get fresh tires. We're going to get gas. But for some reason, the Hendrick drivers, I don't know if it was groupthink or what have you. Maybe it was a strategy that we're going to try to race this race all together. They decided we're going to stay out, and it basically it killed them. Larson ended up finishing the race 10th. It was just a struggle for him. This is what we see at non-drafting tracks, is that you can take a really good driver, but you get them out of clean air and it really does hurt him. And I mean, that was the story of the night with Larson. Once he lost the lead, once he got shuffled back into traffic, he just was not the same driver. Before that wreck, William Byron had taken the lead. And by the end of the night, William Byron's finishing 2 or 3 laps down, finishing around 21st. Alex Bowman had the same issue. Now, Chase Elliott was the kind of the lone exception of those 4. He was able to race himself into the top 3, but it really did impact the way that race finished out. Hamlin was able to get to the front. We talked about Hamlin, how he had led the most laps in this race last year. He had led like the second most in the spring race. So obviously they had something figured out. He was able to ascend to the lead the most laps on the night, and ended up winning that race. As far as implications for today, it's just a good reminder that whatever you model or Vegas expects to happen as the most likely outcome, sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes because of something completely out of a driver's control, or especially out of our control, things just don't work out. And that's probably the biggest thing to take away for building lineups for tomorrow, especially because the biggest edge that you're gonna have is going to be ownership. If you've got a great source of ownership like ours, take a look at our ownership. If you're not a premium member, sign up for a weekly pass, take a test drive tomorrow to see how this ownership bakes out, because there's going to be heavy ownership on these drivers in the back because of the nature of the race of Talladega. And if you can simply just find pivots with similar place differential upside that are coming in at much lower ownership, it's going to put you so much higher above the field, because just because somebody has great track history at super speedways or Talladega doesn't necessarily guarantee them a high finish tomorrow. So finding these ownership pivots is going to be essential for tournaments, especially in the 150 max tournaments tomorrow.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. Even, being behind the curve on the NASCAR side of things, just from the DFS perspective, I mean, we're always looking for those less than likely opportunities where we can exploit something that can happen, might not be the expected result, might not be where Vegas is seeing it, where even our projections are seeing it. But if it's got a reasonable enough probability of happening and you're playing that when no one else is, you only need to be right so many times for that to be extremely, extremely profitable, just for the amount that it vaults you up above the field when the entire field is on a guy like Larson last week. So knowing that we're making those decisions, knowing that we've got a very specific track in Talladega, does it make sense to talk a little bit first about the playoff positioning? What anything with anybody locking up playoffs or any of that? Is any of that gonna have an impact on how you see this race unfolding? Or are we kind of not too worried about the playoffs before we get into the track specifics?
Well, for DFS, it's probably something that we're not too specifically worried about, because typically in a super speedway race, these drivers that are starting up at the front, unless it's 150 max type entries, we tend to stay away from these guys because they carry so much, they carry so much risk and variance. But it is worth noting that if you are willing in your lineups, especially in 20 max, if you're willing to really kind of step your foot out there and hope that you walk on water and don't just sink, going back to 2013, every single one of these fall playoff Talladega races, a playoff driver has won. It happens. Now, the reasoning for that, I mean, that can be boiled down to a bunch of things, but I mean, that's more than a trend. That is a solid pattern that's going on now for what, 8 years. Yep. So if you are trying to take a stance on one of these playoff drivers, and especially in lieu of the fact that 9 of our past 11 optimal lineups here at Talladega have included the race winner, then you're going to be wanting to take some shots on these playoff drivers. Now, some definitely have better super speedway records than others, and we'll talk about them as we go throughout the field. But that is something to definitely keep in mind. I'm glad you brought that up, that if you are willing to take these shots that can go for the moon or crater through the earth, then you do need to take some shots on these playoff drivers.
Absolutely. So yeah, it sounds like maybe mixing in, one of them here and there throughout your lineup building, maybe build some safe ones and then build one that mixes one of those guys in just to differentiate yourselves. And just looking through some of the ownership, I mean, it does look like there are some opportunities around ownership if you land on the right one. I think it sounds like that landing on the right one is going to be the real trick to turn. So I think the top drivers tool is going to be essential in putting those types of lineups together. That's what I'm going to be looking at throughout the show as we talk about these drivers. But so that I have a little bit of a better sense of, what's really going to be critical for this race. You've mentioned it a couple times, and everybody should hit the like and the subscribe button down there and make sure that they're giving us the thumbs up for all that great analysis that Phil's given us so far. And also, by the way, in doing that, if you're looking at other sports, make sure to jump over to the site. NFL Week 4 Big Board is free this week. MLB player rankings are free this week, and MMA fighter rankings are free as well. So we've got a lot of free content up at the site that's going to show some people all the goods behind the scenes. But as I was getting at, Phil, what's important here, I think, is to talk a little bit about the super speedway and the big race like this, and what impact that has on the type of race we're expecting, what's going to be important in what we're looking at on the top driver tool in the place differential versus the dominator type of race. It sounds to me like we're a lot more concerned about the place differential here, and that's what I'm seeing on the board. But I want to make sure that I've got that correct so that I know about building lineups. And if any new people are with us or going to be catching the show later on, maybe they're not so sure. So just talk to us about the nature of Talladega and the race.
Yeah, the nature of Talladega, because it's a 2.5 mile long super speedway. You've got the draft, you've got cars packed up together. It can lend itself to chaos. And typically it does. If you watch the truck race, then you saw that. I mean, we can have multiple crashes that involve multiple cars. I believe we only finished the race. 40 trucks started that race. We only finished the race with 19. That's not something that we're kind of expecting in the Cup race, because these are better drivers, better skill. They know what they know what they're doing. But we have oddly seen past Talladega races where, I mean, it's just been total pandemonium, and we're looking at maybe 15 of the 40 drivers are gonna finish this race. So because of all of this potential chaos, the potential for drivers to wreck out, it really is a matter of going to two different scoring categories. We're worried about place differential, like you said, and we're especially worried about finishing position. People are going to overemphasize place differential tomorrow, but they need to be just as equally concerned about finishing position. Why is that? We talked about these past 11 optimals. If you look at the past 11 optimals on DraftKings for these Talladega races, the furthest anyone has finished has been 12th place. So you need top 10 finishes paired with place differential. You need these drivers to fill those two categories in order to get a high score. Now, yes, we've had drivers that started in the teens, that start in the single digits, that end up with a high score, but it's because, one, they finished in the top 10, and second, they've been able to pair that with some laps led. Now, trying to predict who's going to lead laps, that's a bit of a fool's errand. You just kind of hope that the darts that you throw, that they end up leading laps throughout the race. It's not something that you're typically banking on with these drivers, but if it happens, it happens. So that's the basic thing. We're worried about place differential. We're worried about finishing position, and because of that, that lends us to starting drivers that are in the latter half of the field, 20th through 40th. And I had this conversation yesterday on Twitter. Somebody questioned, well, I don't really feel safe starting anybody further back than Eric Jones in 26. I mean, I don't want to play these drivers that we typically avoid on a normal week. I don't want to play a Justin Haley. I don't want to play a Justin Allgaier. I don't want to play a Landon Castle, or name your punt, BJ McLeod, Josh Bilicki. Well, the fact is that these guys can benefit from the chaos just like anybody else. Last year in the fall Talladega race, we had 3 of these punts. We had actually 4. We had Justin Haley, we had Joey Gase, we had Cody Ware, and then Garrett Smithley. 4 of these drivers that we would typically not play on any week unless it was a 500 lap race like Martinsville. These guys all finished with top 20 days. So you can't rule out practically anybody from your player pool this week, because they all, especially these guys in the latter half of the field, they all have that same opportunity to gain place differential and get a higher finish as the guys in the best equipment.
Yeah, and look, just looking down some of our board here, I've got it filtered by price right now, but you can see a few of those guys standing out from those late positions. So yeah, that's a critical note, and I think that's really important and something that I'm glad you brought up. So just getting into the strategy of it, and we'll go down through the drivers here based on some of the price tiers and what we're seeing there. But it sounds like one of the most important things is almost just to roster a clean card that everybody finishes the race, and then you're looking to hit that the placement differential and the top 6 percentages as hard as you can. So is that kind of a good approach to you? Do you maybe sort the tool by top 6 finish percentages, because Alex has given us a bunch of different data points to sort with on the top drivers tool. We've got the place differential, the dominators, the top six. Those are really where I key in on. So if I'm sorting by like top six probability, comparing that to ownership, taking into account the idea of the placement differential points, and then just looking for guys who stand out for being under-owned, is that kind of a sound approach to putting this together? Or is there something in there where you might be thinking about, all right, because this guy is this guy, or because this guy is starting from this position, driving this type of kit, I'm not sure, does he stand a better chance of not wrecking out? Are there safer drivers within this mix, I guess is what I'm asking? Or are we just going by like leverage and opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, at a race like Talladega, you never want to say that a driver is safe, but there are some drivers that inevitably they just find a way to finish. Like if people will find the link to the race sheets, you can look through here at the past 7 races at Talladega, and you can see that there are just inevitably some drivers who finish the race. You've got Ryan Newman, who's finished on the lead lap in every single one of the past 7 Talladega races, and he's the only driver that's done that. If you narrow that down to finishing on the lead lap in the past 6 of the 7 Talladega races, well, then that includes Ryan Blaney and that includes Eric Almirola. You can also look at the drivers who are just finishing the 3 super speedway races of this year. And that's going to include Chase Elliott. That's going to include Kevin Harvick. That's going to include Ryan Preece. That's going to include, actually, that's really that's your short list. And then once you expand that to 2 out of 3, it comes together. This really is, I place an emphasis on ownership, but I think this really is going to be maximizing the top driver tool. I'm not so worried about dominator percentage unless you are trying to find that upper echelon 1% sort of lineup where you think one of these drivers that are starting in the top 12 is going to lead the most laps and also get a top 10 finish. It's very, very risky, but the reward is you're knocking down every GPP that you win with that lineup. Something that I think people need to consider this week is don't build lineups if you have access to the projections. Don't build lineups according to the standard projections. Build lineups according to the ceiling projections. That way, when you do your 150 max lineups, you're going to get included these back marker cars, because if you just do standard projections, you could possibly miss the boat on a BJ McLeod, a Joey Gaze, a Garrett Smithley, any one of these guys that happens to survive whatever carnage there is, gets a top 15 finish, and ends up getting very close to being an optimal play if he isn't an optimal play because of all of the place differential that he gains. So I really do think that if you are playing 150 max, build your projections off of these ceiling projections. That way you are literally building the best case scenarios for all 6 drivers that you're putting in your lineups.
That's a great point, and that's great for just general lineup building, particularly if you're using the optimizer or some of the different tools, our lineup builder on the site. It's just a great way to build because you're capturing the full range of outcomes for everybody. You're not limiting those guys to their median projections up down toward the bottom end where you'll never get to them. So that makes a ton of sense. It's something that people can take forward across other sports as well. And guys, if you're looking to get into DFS, if you're looking to get into NASCAR DFS or any other sports, we've got a ton of content at the site. You can get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for basically everything DFS. I don't know that there's a sport that has a main slate for DFS that we don't cover. $29.95 gets you on the Awesemo Plus weekly pass for the platinum level. It includes full access to all of our premium content and tools, includes player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel where me and Phil and Josh and all the Joshes and everybody else, Lofty and Adam and all those guys, everybody's hanging out all week long, answering questions, busting balls, talking shop. It's a great environment. We've got a great community, so that's included. Make sure you sign up when you join up. It's got lineup builder in there, a whole lot more behind the scenes. If you're a new user of Awesemo Platinum, then you can take advantage of the promo code for this show, NASCAR Strategy Show, all smashed together as one word, NASCAR Strategy Show, all in caps. That gets you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. If you're looking only for NASCAR DFS content, you can sign up for our Awesemo Plus NASCAR package for only $9.95. Just hit the site, look for the little Awesemo Plus on the left. It's in yellow. It's easy to find. Drop it on down. Pick whichever package you want. Stop guessing. Start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Phil, Let's talk driver specifics. There's one guy off the top that you kind of were mentioning. The only people that we care about dominator points for are potentially some of these big playoff drivers, these guys who could stand out and win the race and be that dart throw where he's getting the excellent finish. You're getting some dominator points out of him, and maybe not a lot of the field is on him. One of the highest priced drivers on this slate fits part of that profile, but he's got a tremendous amount of ownership, and that's Denny Hamlin, last week's winner, coming in with almost 60% ownership. Not much place differential, but he's got a very nice rating in terms of being in the top 6, finishing with some dominator points on the board. Is this a driver that you're looking at, or is that just way too much ownership for that kind of a play?
Oh, it's hella risky, because I mean, we were talking about a driver that can lose the most place differential out of everybody in this race. So you're talking, if Hamlin is going to end up optimal in this race, he's got to lead a bunch of laps. Now, granted, that is what Hamlin's plan is. I was listening to the Positive Regression podcast earlier this week, and they were talking about Hamlin's approach to races like Talladega and Daytona. And his basic approach is that if I can't be behind the field so as to avoid the wreck, then I'm going to be in front of it so as to not get involved in the wreck. So starting on the pole, I mean, he can dictate how this race goes initially. And if people will look at the race sheets, look at the laps led data. I mean, we've had some races where the pole sitter has led some considerable laps. You have to go back to the fall race of 2018 to find that last time that pole sitter that day led 108 laps. So I mean, there's definitely been some scenarios, but the matter of the fact is that if you look at all of these races since 2013, there's a bunch of races where there's no laps led, where there's just single digits. If I average all of these races out, then we're talking about 19 to 20 laps. And quite frankly, if all he does is lead that, let's just say that he wins, just for kicks and grins. Let's just say that Hamlin wins. He is the betting favorite, regardless of whatever book that you look at. If he just leads 20 laps, then we're talking about maybe an extra 5 to 6 bonus points there. That's going to give him a 50 point day. And there are so many drivers that can outscore that 50 points just because they actually have access to place differential. If they get a top 10 finish and they get that place differential, they're easily going to outscore. They're easily going to outscore Hamlin. Like if I take a look here at DraftKings points, if this was the spring race from the previous optimal, if Hamlin leads the 20 laps, wins the race, that 50 points, it wouldn't have been enough to be in the optimal lineup from the spring race. So Hamlin really is in an uphill battle, and seeing that ownership projection, and don't think that this is out of line. You have to look at where Hamlin's ownership has been the previous 2 super speedway races. It's hovered above where it should, and he's been in a similar spot. So if you're going to play Hamlin, and 150 max on DraftKings and FanDuel, I've got 2 shares of him on each site, just in case he does the inevitable. You're going to need somewhere in the neighborhood of probably a 40 lap led day, and that's assuming that he doesn't fall out of the top 5. So it's definitely very risky. And then to combine that with the projected ownership, like I just do not like that play, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, just looking at it with, again, with DFS instincts, I think I totally agree with you in terms of would I want this guy in my player pool, second highest price driver on the board with that kind of ownership. And the answer comes up no, or at least there's a massive undercut based on everything that you just told me here. So I think that makes a ton of sense. Just looking at similarly priced drivers, if we go up by $200, we get to Ryan Blaney starting in 4th. It looks like Blaney's dealing with a similar kind of issue in terms of those position points, the placement differential points, but he's got a significantly lower chance of being in the top 6. But then we've also got him with only 10% ownership coming up. So it seems like maybe there's a little bit more of a good dart throw there, or maybe if we look at guys below in the price tiers in Alex Bowman Kurt Busch, both in the 10,000 tier. Both are limited in terms of the dominator, but they've got decent chances in the top 6, both owned in single digits and have a little bit of placement differential points there. So talk to me about those 3 guys and which one you might be more or less willing to throw darts with. Or is it all
I think Blaney's path to being optimal is it's nearly exactly the same as Hamlin. And that's the problem, is that you get 3 place differential spots to work with, but you're paying $200 more. So it all seems to basically come out in the wash. But I mean, Blaney could easily lead laps here. He's done it plenty of times before. He won back-to-back races here. Ford, for whatever it's worth, has won all 3 super speedway races this season. So Ford may have something figured out this last year of the Generation 6 car for these super speedway events. But yeah, if you're going to play Hamlin, then I think necessarily you need to have some lineups with Blaney, because they're basically the same driver. They're expensive drivers that need to lead a bunch of laps, and if they do that, they finish with a top 5 or just outright win the race, then they have a good chance to be in the optimal lineup. We talk about Bowman and Busch rounding out the other 2 drivers in this 10K range. They've got the thing that neither Hamlin or Blaney have, and that's place differential. And with those, I mean, Bowman has a maximum of 10. Busch has a maximum of 13, and that place differential, it's so crucial. It's it helps build the base of what these drivers can do. Bowman is a guy that I've got listed as a potential dominator this week, because I've seen him do it before in previous super speedway races. He's a driver that's on the below the cutoff line for the playoffs. So they're this goes for Bowman, Byron, Harvick, and Bell. These are all guys that are below the cutoff line. They need to get stage points. They need to finish with a high finish, so that next week at the Charlotte Roval, they're not trying to fight their way out of a cloth bag. They don't want to put themselves in a bigger hole than they already are. And I mean, it could definitely happen here at Talladega with a bad finish. So Bowman's a guy that needs to get up to the front. He could lead some laps. He's going to get some place differential. His path to being optimal is a little bit tougher, but quite frankly, this is a guy that has finished in the top 10 here multiple times. Our most recent super speedway race at Daytona, he finished 7th. So the path is there. It's a little bit tougher for him because he has, he has a fewer place differential than guys that we're going to talk about. But because of that, you might get him at an ownership discount.
Okay, so we've got a few pieces to work with there in the 10K range. It sounds like that's where we're pulling our dart throws out of, which is a little bit maybe counter to normal DFS instincts, where you're thinking, hey, these top plays, these are going to be the best guys, just plug and play wherever you can afford them, and you're building your lineups to try and get to those guys. So let's talk about some of these guys in the next tier down in the 9K range. Before we do that, though, we're going to jump over and we're going to talk about Prize Picks real quick. I threatened everybody that we were going to talk about them, and this is the point in the show we're going to do it. So our partner Prize Picks, they're nice enough to sponsor our show and a lot of our shows. It's a great site. They offer daily prop-based contests, and they want to help you get started with a deposit bonus. You won't be dealing with sharks, optimizers, mass entries, any of that usual DFS stuff. To get started, you just pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board. You go whether or not they're going to go over or under the projected scores. If you pick 5 correct in a lineup, you can net up to 10 times your entry fee. That's pretty significant for picking 5 things correct on a night and not worrying about all the different competition that we worry about with leverage and all these different things, being duped and all those things with our lineup. So Prize Picks has games for NASCAR. I'm going to put it up top this week. NBA, MLB, WNBA, NFL, esports. They have everything up there. You can combine players from different sports, different categories within the sport. So they've got mixed sport entry. Download the app on the App Store or on Google Play today. Make your first deposit using promo code Awesemo, just the way you think it's spelled, just the way you spell it when you come to the site. Gives you an instant deposit match of up to $100. Deposit match of $100 just for plugging in the word Awesemo when you sign up with these guys. For today's board, we didn't make any picks. We'll talk about them a little bit more. I'll pull Prize Picks up, and I'll ambush Phil at some point in the show with a couple of Prize Picks picks. So we'll come back and talk about our sponsor again. But Prize Picks, check them out, guys. App Store, Google Play, download the app. Promo code Awesemo one last time. Phil, let's get into these $9,000 drivers here. I'll take a look at Prize Picks and pull up some things to talk about. But we've got one guy who kind of stands out to me anyway at 9,400. He's our top projected driver. He's coming up with the highest probability of being in the top 6. He's coming up with the highest probability of racking up a top 4 placement differential score, and that's Justin Haley, starting in 38th. Now, I know before you mentioned that somebody was telling you were getting into a Twitter debate about a starting position that was significantly higher up in the field than that. I think you said 20 something. So talk to me about Haley starting in 38th and why we can expect such a dramatic score. And with 34% ownership, those probabilities are still above that. That's what we like to look at for leverage purposes. Is Haley ownable at 34% ownership with those probabilities of being such a good finisher for us?
Oh, yeah. If people don't play the Xfinity Series NASCAR DFS slates, then they probably don't appreciate Haley, because what they're used to is seeing Haley in the back marker 77. That's generally like a 25th through a 30th place finish. But in the 11 car in the Xfinity Series for Colleague Motorsports, he is a contender. He was one of the final 4 at the championship race last year at Phoenix. He's probably going to be in a similar situation this year. He has a definitive knack for super speedway events. He's won 2 races at Talladega in the Xfinity Series. He's won a race at Daytona. I believe he won the most recent race in the Xfinity Series at Daytona. You come over here to the Cup Series, when he made a spot start for Spire Motorsports a couple of summers ago at Daytona. Yes, it was because the event got called to rain, but who crossed the finish line? It was Justin Haley. Haley has shown a real knack for getting around these tracks, and generally somebody at his age already having gained this knowledge and not having it built up through years of experience, it's definitely something to notice. Now, if Haley was in the 77, we'd still play him because he'd be starting 33rd. But this week he's starting 38th because Colleague, who is going full time in the Cup Series next year, is throwing their 16 car out there. So because this car didn't compete last week, it goes to the very back of the field. We're getting a fantastic driver at a track that he's won at before, at a super speedway event that you would expect him to excel in. He's got tons of place differential. Very well could have the highest fantasy point score on DraftKings or FanDuel tomorrow. He's a guy that you've got to play in cash. No matter how you feel about it, you've got to play him in cash. And quite frankly, I know his ownership is going to be through the roof, and he's going to be one of those drivers. In fact, I talked about this in my Gas and Go article, that he's going to be one of these drivers that you're going to be looking for pivots off of him in the same same starting range. But Lord, I mean, things are just so well set up for Haley that it's hard to envision how he fails. But you've got to remember the very nature of this track. He very well could fail. 3 starts here at Talladega in the Cup Series. He's got an 11th place finish in this race last year, but in the spring he finished 30th. You go back to the spring race of 2019, he finished 32nd. So once again, nothing's guaranteed, no matter how good the spot looks. For cash, he's a must play, but for tournaments, he is a driver that you can very well look at trying to go under the field to get a leg up.
Makes sense. Yeah, sounds like a cash lock to me. And that's something that, again, normally we talk about a lot of follow the projections, follow the ownership, some of just the optimal builds for these. So would you consider him, if you're building for cash, and I'm not really a cash player, I'm more of a GPP player in general, but if you were building for cash, based on what we talked about with Denny Hamlin, based on what we're looking at with Justin Haley, what you just went through, is Haley your first click for cash games over Hamlin, despite where, the 60% of the field going to Hamlin? Haley just makes a lot more sense as the first click and kind of the mandatory cash play, where Hamlin doesn't really seem to me. Is that viable, or am I just misunderstanding you maybe?
No. You are correct. You start your cash lineups this week on DraftKings and FanDuel with Haley. And quite frankly, if you're playing anybody starting above the 20th position in cash, you're adding way too much variance to your lineups. What have we talked about? You want to give yourself a very strong base with place differential and finishing position. And all of these guys that are starting 20th or lower, they're going to offer that to you. Hamlin is going to definitely offer you finishing position upside, but he lacks place differential, obviously starting first. So you need so much in terms from him of laps led points to compensate for that. So it's safer to go with the thing that is easier to get, which is place differential.
Yep, makes total sense. And yeah, even if he goes out and wins the race, like you were saying earlier, he just doesn't have that foundation. So he doesn't stand as tall as potentially some of these guys who have been putting in those building blocks of the differential points. So talk to me about some of these guys in the 9,000 range that are starting in similar positions. We've got Byron starting all the way up at 10th at 9,800, the most expensive in this block. But then we've got other guys like Ross Chastain, Eric Almirola, and Justin Algier who are starting 23rd, 20th, and 33rd, all kind of grouped together, all with somewhat similar probabilities of being in the top 6, finishing in the top 4 in placement differential. And out of those guys, Chastain stands out for a lack of ownership, as does Byron, but we're getting more probability on the more highly owned guys in Almirola and Algier. So talk to me about those guys. Do you have a favorite in that group?
It's the chalky pick, but I mean, it's Allgaier. He's got plenty of experience. He used to be a full-time Cup driver. It was not good equipment, but he had a sponsor. He was able to come up into the Cup Series. He rode around for a couple of seasons, and him and his sponsor went back down to the Xfinity Series, where he currently races for Dale Jr. But the fact is, he's in the 77 this week. It's been a good car in these super speedway races. You've got a top 10 from Haley at the second Daytona race. You go to the Daytona 500. Jamie McMurray was in this car. It finished in the top 10. There's just a lot to like about Justin Allgaier this week. He offers you experience. He knows this track. He gives you the place differential. I don't know how hard he's going to push for a top 10 finish. So if you're worried about ownership with him, that might be something to consider, is that he's going to give you place differential, but he may, it's just a matter of how much does a top 10 finish matter to a guy that is not invested in this series. We will see. But Chastain is a very interesting driver. With him starting 23rd, he really does seem like he's overpriced. Like DraftKings overcompensated for this place differential. But the matter of the fact is that he finished 16th here in the spring. You go back to his last start when he was racing for Premium Motorsports in the fall of 2019. He managed to finish 12th, and so far this season in the 3 super speedway races, his worst finish is 18th, and that was at the second Daytona race. So I think it really is a matter with Chastain, and he's going to be, if we're just looking at price, not starting position, he is going to be the pivot off of Allgaier and off of Haley if you're worried about their numbers just getting out of control and what have you. Starting 23rd, he's going to have some place differential. It's not what you would like, but he could very well push himself for a top 10 finish. And the weird thing that we've seen about Chastain is the more chaotic and random the race has been this year, the better he's performed. So, I mean, that really does suit him at a race like tomorrow's race. So I'm going to say, looking at all of these guys, and Byron's a guy that you can sprinkle into lineups as a potential dominator, kind of like Bowman we were talking about. But if we're talking about ranking these guys as for cash games, I like Allgaier the best, but in terms of tournaments, it might be Chastain.
Okay, I like it. Now I'm going to try and say Allgaier's name correctly this time, which I think I just did. So guys, hit that like and subscribe button for me for doing that out there. I said it the wrong way, but on the pre-show, I said it the wrong way like 3 times already in the broadcast, but now I'll try and get it right, and maybe I won't forget going forward. So Phil, just talk to me real quick, roster construction-wise, before we dive into the 8,000s and below. How many guys from the $10,000 and $9,000 range are you looking to get, regardless of who they might be? How many guys are you looking to get into the average build for tournaments from the $10,000 and $9,000 pool? Are we talking about 2 of these guys? Are you trying to force feed a third one by using some of the super low price guys, if we can even fit it? What are we doing in terms of how many of these guys we're looking to get to in our ideal builds?
Oh, I think the majority of my lineups probably have a maximum of 3 of these guys. but it's really just a matter of what their place differential is and what their finishing position ceiling is. So, generally the rule at these types of races is that, I don't know if people ever watched the original Whose Line Is It Anyway, but this is like Whose Line Is It Anyway. The rules are made up and the points don't matter. Well, here at Talladega, the salaries don't matter. Whatever you're left with is what you have, because salaries are, you're just not you're not going to worry about it, because there's other things that you're trying to consider with your lineup construction. But I do say that in this 9K and above range, probably the maximum I have is going to be 3 guys, while the majority have 2.
Have 2. Makes sense. And that kind of, it seems to jibe just looking at how the board is laid out, where some of the green is in my conditional formatting. It looks like we've got a lot of drivers to work with in putting together some of these builds from the $8,000 and the $7,000 range. So let's talk about some of those as we're going down. I think just 2 drivers that stand out for ownership in that kind of a pool are in the middle of the 8,000s, and then at the top of the 7,000s, we get Joey Logano and we get Kyle Larson, both with massive ownership, both let's call it 50% plus ownership. Talk to me about those 2 drivers, the differences between them, and whether or not you're getting to either one of them.
Larson was a guy that my initial builds this morning, I had maybe a couple of shares in both lineups, but I swapped out of them. These super speedway races have not been kind to Larson throughout his career. He's got some spike finishes, but you look at his history here at Talladega going back to 2018. He's only got 1 finish on the lead lap, and that's out of 5 races. That was an 11th place finish in the fall of 2018. The last 2 races, he's completely. I believe the spring race was something mechanical, which there's nothing you can really do about that. But then the fall 2019 race was a wreck. You look at his finishes so far this season, you've got a 10th at Daytona, which is favorable, but then you've got the 40th at Talladega, and then a 20th in the second Daytona race. While he's cheaper than Blaney and Hamlin, once again, Larson, you need the lap sled points out of him, because he's not going to give you place differential. He might get you a top 10 finish if you're lucky, but you really do need him to lead somewhere in that neighborhood of 40 to 50 points. And that's just something that I'm personally not seeing. And I do think that his ownership is going to be relatively high based on the information that I got from a sports book, where he is receiving the highest percentage of handles this week. Like, people are, for whatever reason, even though they've got this history right in front of him, they are flocking to Larson. And generally, whatever we see happen in the betting markets trickles down here into DFS. So if people are going to be on Larson, that's a great leverage spot to just completely get off. Logano is a guy that I wrote up in Gas and Go that I really like. He always finds his way to the front. He's got that same mentality as Hamlin, where I'm going to get to the front and I'm going to lead laps. I'm going to stay out there, because if I'm in front of the pack, then I can't get caught up in the big one. Even though he's got that mentality, somehow Logano continues to find a way to get caught up in wrecks eventually. Logano was just a couple of miles away from winning the Daytona 500 before him and Keselowski collected each other earlier in February. This race earlier in the spring, he finished 39th, and then he was leading a bunch of laps at Daytona and then ran into some trouble and finished 23rd. I'm going to say, if there's going to be any driver besides Denny Hamlin that you're going to project as a potential dominator with the top 10 finish, I think the second most likely guy that I would be looking at is Logano. But once again, that is only for your sprinkling in tournaments as a potential dominator play. It really is interesting here on DraftKings, starting at Elliott at 8,800 and then working yourself down into the next tier with Truex at 7,600. These are all playoff drivers, and these are all drivers that need those lap sled points.
Yeah, and there's just a solid pool of drivers, just looking at the different things on our top drivers tool, who aren't getting that kind of ownership attention, who are, like you said, there's a lot of these guys are starting up toward the top. They're playoff drivers. They've got the opportunity on the laps. But if you're going to that kind of a play from this price tier, to me, I'm just looking at some of the ownership and I'm starting to think that maybe making those pivots for that type of driver, to a Keselowski, to an Elliott, who are a little bit lower owned, to a Kyle Busch. Is Kyle Busch viable here? He's only 10% owned. That's half of even the lower owned guys here. I know, again, it's a driver without a lot of place differential opportunities, starting second, the lowest out of all of our placement point top four probabilities, but somewhat of a chance to lead some laps, somewhat of a chance to finish in the top six with minimal ownership. Is he viable from that position, or are you just kind of paying attention to the guys that you actually named in that tier?
Yeah, I mean, God, all of these guys from Elliott through Truex. Now, Truex is a different sort. In fact, Truex is a guy that if you look at his prize pick number, and I was just scanning that, his number currently sits at 30.5. I think you can solidly take the under on that. But all of these guys have pathways to victory. Something that was talked about in that podcast I mentioned earlier is that Hamlin's into the next round. So his basic strategy, and we see these at the super speedway races where teammates and manufacturers tend to work together. Well, there's only so many Toyotas. In fact, they basically all run for Joe Gibbs. So what's to stop Denny Hamlin from trying to push one of his teammates into the win late in the race, get one of his teammates into the next round, keep one of these Chevys out from making the playoffs into the next round. So if that happens, I mean, you could very well see Kyle Busch in that scenario. If people are going to play Kyle Larson, then at a similar price, I think I would much rather play Kyle Busch.
All right. Makes sense. So now I'm jumping down into this next tier down, and there is just a big board full of people with opportunities for place differential finishes, as well as some top six opportunities. So I'm looking at guys like Newman, Chris Buescher, Landon Cassill, Austin Dillon, Daniel Suarez. Well, Daniel Suarez doesn't qualify, but the other guys do. Daniel Suarez off that list. Do not consider him. But talk to me about those guys I'm seeing a little bit of opportunity around the top six and a little bit of opportunity around finishing in our top four of placement differential. And again, these are guys who are owned in the 10 to 15% range, where it seems like there's some opportunity for not all that much money. So talk to me about that pool. Do you have a favorite in there?
Oh, my favorite guy, and I always flock to him in these types of races, is Corey LaJoie. Corey's got place differential. It seems throughout his history that he typically has run better at Daytona, but he does have a couple of top 11 finishes at his history here, and that's in worse equipment than what he's got now. He was a lap away from finishing second place, if not outright winning the previous Daytona race before he got caught up in the wreck. He's just a really good super speedway racer. He's a hair aggressive, but that'll probably tone itself down, because one of the reasons I think that you always see a playoff driver win these Talladega races is that the rest of the field is cognizant of what's at stake for these guys. So they tend to be a bit more respectful of these drivers who are competing for a championship, while these guys are on the outside looking in. These guys are just trying to accumulate purse money instead of trying to fight for a win. The last thing that you want is to be one of these guys and put a bad taste in a team or a driver's mouth and get yourself blackballed from the series after your contract runs out. So
yeah, that's not going to help you make any more prize money after that. So
yeah, I like LaJoie, but starting at Newman at 7,500 and quite frankly working yourself down through the 7Ks and the 6Ks, this is going to be where the majority of your cash lineup comes from. These are guys that have more place differential to gain than they have to lose. There's some of these drivers that we like more than others, like Ryan Newman starting 25th. We talked about him before. He always seems to finish this race. He's got 4 top 10 finishes out of these seven races. 5 top 20 finishes. Like he picks up place differential. He's going to be a somewhat safe play. Finished 13th here in the spring, came back to the second Daytona race, and he finished third. Landon Cassill, people may be a little hesitant to play Cassill. Cassill was a guy that I was really big on in the summer Daytona race, just because he's a veteran. He knows what to do when he was in poor equipment. He knew the objective was, let's just finish the race. If we make money, that's better than having to lose money because we wrecked the car. And that was what he did in the 00 when he was racing for Starcom. Now he's in a better car. You've got finishes of 22nd, 34th, and 14th in his previous 3 starts here at Daytona, at Talladega. Yes, he finished 36th in that Daytona race, but he got caught up in a wreck. I think it just lines up better for him this event. He's probably going to get you maybe 15 to 20 place differential spots. He's not a guy that I think I would play go overboard in tournaments, just because I don't think the impetus is on him to try to really excel to his potential for this car. If it happens, then that's one thing. But if this doesn't turn out to be a wreck fest and it's just a matter of shuffling at the end for position, he's not going to be a guy that's really going to force the issue to try to make a 20th place finish into a 10th place finish. So he's a guy that I think you can try to find pivots on in tournaments, but for cash, once again, he's just a guy that you're putting in there.
Just lock and load. Makes a ton of sense. So, Phil, I don't know about you. When we talk about all this stuff and everything, I'm building my lineups and I'm always checking my scores all through the night, through the race, through the ball game, whatever the case may be. When my lineups tank, my next favorite thing to see is one of our subscribers win just a boatload of money. And we had that happen in Showdown the other day. My guy Richie won $500,000 in the NFL Showdown. He tweeted out his screenshot to our Awesemo Hall of Fame account today, and he's going to be getting his free month of platinum, which he may not need anymore now that he's got $500,000 in the bank. But hey, I'm not going to speculate on that sort of thing. So guys, if you do similarly, maybe it's not even $500,000. All you have to do is finish in the top 3 of a contest with over 5,000 contestants in it. Tweet the win to Awesemo, H-O-F, Awesemo, H-O-F on Twitter. You get a free month of platinum. You have to follow up on that. Email me at support. We'll get you set up. We'll get that taken care of. So I wanted to clean that up, talk about that, but we've got like 2 minutes left here in the show, Phil. So we're going to go over these bottom of the barrel racers in terms of salary really, really quickly. One guy stands out. He's pulling in all the ownership at this tier, and that's Ricky Stenhouse. Is there anybody else that's viable that you want to bring up, or is it all about Stenhouse in that 6,000 and below tier?
If you're doing single entry, 3 max, 20 max in this range, really kind of, I would look at Stenhouse for sure. But if you're looking for pivots, Alfredo is definitely feasible. If you're feeling spicy, you can add Chase Briscoe to that line. In terms of cash, like I think the furthest that I would go for this range would be maybe Alfredo. If we're doing 150 max, like I said, all these guys, they get sprinkled in there. Maybe probably no more than 5 to 10%. Make sure that you set a fantasy cruncher rule where it's no more than one of these back marker guys per lineup, so that you don't get overloaded with these drivers, because that could really kill your potential. But if you're going 150 max, just all of these guys in your lineup. That
makes sense. So talking about, just real quick, if we're thinking about that rule in Fantasy Cruncher where we want to say, no more than one driver below X salary, where would you put X? Are we talking about 6,000 even, or are you maybe going up a little bit and landing it somewhere around like Ryan Preece at 67, Eric Jones at 65, or do we maybe want to let those guys trickle in? And did we miss anybody in that group of Preece, Jones, Reddick, and DiBenedetto?
I like Reddick in tournaments. He's got back-to-back 7th place finishes here. As far as guys that you want in your lineups, but you want to limit just how many you have of them per lineup, start that at Smithley at 5,200. And it just so works that DraftKings priced all the punts together. So Smithley, Ware, Gase, McLeod, Billicky, Houff. I don't know how I feel about Davison, if he's even been added to the player pool just yet. But these are all guys that if you're going to at least have one build rule, it's add all of these guys together, but tell it no more than one per lineup.
There you go. So we've given you the picks. We've given you the formulas for Fantasy Cruncher. We got to head out of here. Before we do that, Phil, just real quick off the top, I'm going to go to the top guy on the board, Denny Hamlin, knowing that most of Prize Picks points come from wins and finishing placement. 34.5 over under on Prize Picks.
You're going to need a 6th place finish or better, and I say that Hamlin gives that to you.
There you go. I love it. That's been Phil. I've been Terry. Stick around. I'm actually jumping over to the other chair, and I'll be on MLB Live Before Lock coming up in about 5 minutes, 6 o'clock. We've got wall-to-wall content for NFL tomorrow, guys. Just fire up the YouTube channel at about 9 o'clock. You're going to see me and Josh opening the day, and then it's just never-ending right up until lock. So tune in, catch all of that stuff. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. We appreciate it.